All right, so welcome everyone to School Gardens 101. Thank you so much for coming. And my name is Dinah Mack. I am the Education Program Manager at Mass Farm to School, and I'll be hosting the workshop. This is the first of 3 workshops that are all around school gardens. This is a basic introduction to school gardens, hence the 101. We're going to have a workshop on school garden food safety. And we are going to have a workshop called Best Practices in the School Garden that will address some other things that are not addressed in this workshop. So I imagine you're going to learn a lot today from Kendra and Kelly, who I'll introduce in a minute. And so hopefully you'll join us for the other 2 workshops as well. If you have any questions during the workshop, please throw your questions in the chat, and Lisa, who's on the call, will get those to Kendra and Kelly as well. And for people who are new to Mass Farm to School, Mass Farm to School is an organization that strengthens local farms and fisheries, and we work with schools to increase local food purchasing and education. And part of the education program is school gardening and creating outdoor classrooms. There's a lot of ways you can get involved. We have professional learning opportunities. We have policy and advocacy work, and we have a lot of communication that go out. And if you would like to stay involved, you'll have a copy of the slide deck at the end of the workshop, and our web address is on here, and there's ways to get in touch with us. A couple of things I'm just going to announce, and then I'll pass the torch to our speakers today. The first thing is we have a conference that is coming up during May 16th, during the week of May 16th to the 21st. We're going to be hosting our 6th statewide gathering, the Massachusetts Farm and Seed to School Conference. And this year we're going to be doing a hybrid event. So during the week of May 16th to the 21st, we're going to have virtual workshops daily. And then on the weekend, we're going to have some in-person field trips across the state, opportunities to network and meet in person in small groups at different venues. And those will be announced. We're also going to be having some school garden tours across the state as part of this garden series. And so those tours will also be announced. So the best place to find out is join our mailing list or go to our website to look at events. The other thing I just want to draw your attention to is that we have an annual Farm to School Institute. And for people who are coming from schools who might want to build a farm to school team at your school, this is a really good opportunity to create a collaborative team that involves people from across the school building, classroom, administration, health and wellness, food service, counseling. The Institute is in the fall. There's a 2-day kickoff where you have time to create a plan for the year of how you'll implement Farm to School into your program. And then you'll have school year coaching from a coach who helps facilitate your work and your progress toward your goal. So stay tuned for that and for how to apply to that. And that applications will be coming up in the spring, and that conference is in October. That institute. All right, so what you came here for today was to learn about School Gardening 101, and this workshop will focus on funding, garden location, what to plant and seeds, how to build strong collaboration, what to do in the summer if you have a school garden, and there will also be some resources. And our speakers today are Kelly Cronin, who is the garden specialist at Witchcraft Heights Elementary School in Salem, and Kendra Dawsey, who the former school programs manager with Healthy Chelsea, the former being just actually Friday. So the newly former. All right.
Very new.
So thank you. Big thank you to Kendra and Kelly for speaking, and welcome to everyone. And again, if you have any questions while they're presenting, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. And Kelly and Kendra, you tell me when you want me to advance the slide. And Kendra's going to talk a little bit about funding a school garden.
Awesome. Yeah. So yes, my name is Kendra Dawsey. I was the school programs manager at Healthy Chelsea. So that sounds pretty broad, but a huge part of my position was running school garden programs and working with teachers to ensure their success. Before that, I was the schoolyards program coordinator at Common Ground, which is an environmental education center in Charter High School in New Haven, Connecticut. So basically all of this is to say, I have done a lot with school gardens. And the biggest question with school gardens is obviously funding. There are a lot of districts which feel pretty, they feel like they have a pretty tight budget. You may be thinking, okay, I want to do a school garden, but obviously it's going to cost money. But luckily there are lots and lots of ways to do it. So the first one is grants. There's lots of organizations that have grants that you can apply to. Obviously, applying to a grant does take some work. You have to like gather some things and stuff. Some of the grants are for established or like school gardens where like there's an established garden team. Some are for some that are just right off the bat. But even just like going through this general list, like Whole Kids Foundation actually has a few different grants when it comes to different projects, including one for like bees, if you want to create like insect habitat. Big Green is another one. There's Low Foundation, Annie's. I think Home Depot also has grants. And there's also a lot of state and local grant opportunities. I think like maybe like once every 2 weeks or so, I did see a grant around school gardens coming through. So definitely be on the lookout for those, even if it takes like making a Google search. We do have a link there that is general, that's like, so that is for all of the US, but there are a lot of like local Massachusetts projects. And there's also a lot of, so my work was obviously in Chelsea. I was in Healthy Chelsea. There is a grant going on in Chelsea for an outdoor project that could be used for a school garden project. So there's definitely a lot of possibilities there. And then there's having your own fundraising. So having a garden themed fundraiser is a great way to call attention to the garden effort and spread the world. It could be garden themed. So I think whenever we think of fundraisers, we kind of go to bake sale, but you could do like seed packet sales. You could do like fruit sales, tangerines. You could, if you have access to lots of baby plants or even like flowers, you could sell those. And that is really good to do because not only are you raising funds for the garden, but you're also letting people in the community know. And the more people in the community that know about the garden and know that people are trying to make a garden and more people who are excited about the garden, the more successful it's going to be. So definitely don't shy away from having like that sort of fundraiser. And even if you get like, $100 or so, it is like good to put towards the garden. And I do want to say it is possible to eventually have a byline for gardens in the school budget. The schools that I worked with in Chelsea, there was a district byline for gardens for all of them, which was really great. It was very helpful for the schools just to have that money set aside. And of course, that does take some time working with people, making sure that making sure that the administration knows of your efforts and they're on board. But it's like, it is good. It's great to have. And of course, like, $500 for the garden goes a really long way when it comes to engaging children in outdoor education. So stay tuned for DESE grant funding for farm to school activities. There has been a bill passed which put $1 million into the budget for farm to school programming in Massachusetts schools. Farm to school programming includes school gardens. So there is probably going to be a grant from that. So definitely look out for that. I'll give people a chance to ask any questions. And Kelly, if you have anything you want to say, you could definitely chime in as well.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide. I was just going to share. So I'm Kelly. I teach at Witchcraft Heights Elementary School in Salem, and I helped build our school garden from the ground up. And we actually started with a $1,000 grant from Home Depot, and we used that to build up our garden beds. We used it to buy soil. We have a courtyard garden, so there were just a ton of weeds out there. So we got some weed tarp and some rocks to go kind of over that to suppress all that growth. But definitely having an initial sort of kickstart fund was really helpful. And after that, I was able to get a lot of support from our school PTO. They've been amazing. They do a lot of fundraising for our school. And so I, shared the garden project with them, and they were immediately on board. They were all super supportive of having the kids be involved in our school garden. So they're definitely, if you have a PTO, it's worth reaching out and sort of explaining your project, and definitely I would look to them for support as well. Can we move to the next slide? Perfect. So I'm going to share with you some things to consider or think about when you are thinking about where to place your school garden. You might already have a space in mind, but you definitely want to think about like how much sun or shade your area gets. If you have like a south facing garden space, that is ideal because you'll get the most amount of sunlight. Like I said, in my situation, we sort of had this courtyard space that was being underutilized with our students. And another teacher had gotten that grant and had started building it up. And I was like, I'm going to come help you. And, that ended up being our space. But you can really be creative if you even have, like a small area in front of your school or like on the side or in the back. You can really transform pretty much any space into a garden space. Just making sure that you're thinking about, how much sunlight it's actually going to get, because that will depend, that will impact the kind of plants that you're able to grow in your school garden. You also want to think about like a water source. Luckily, we happen to have like a little hose spigot in our courtyard. But if you don't have access to a hose in your school garden space, you're going to want to think about how are you going to get water to your garden, because lugging gallons of watering cans back and forth could get exhausting. So you might think about maybe trying to get a rain barrel if you're thinking about just doing like some kind of flower garden. I know that we've been asked to not use rain barrel water for growing vegetables, but think about, how would you get water to your space if there's not like a hose out there. You also want to think about where it's located in terms of having unwanted visitors in your garden. And that includes, people walking their dogs and unwanted animal friends. So I don't know if you live in an area where there are lots of deer or raccoons, you might want to think about having it fenced in. You might think about if it's in a place like in front of your school that's like near a sidewalk, putting up some signage that kind of says like, this is our garden space, please keep out, just to make sure that you're not getting any unwanted animal or other visitors in your garden. You also, so like in my situation with having the courtyard garden, we have to have, I'm only allowed to come in when the building is open. So that's been a little bit difficult with weekends and holidays and vacations, making sure that I'm able to access the garden when it needs to be watered or cared for. So you want to think about if you have that type of a situation, making sure to get involved with your custodial crew or your principal, your admin team, to make sure that they are going to be supportive of you, like getting into the garden when you need to in order to do weeding and watering and all that other stuff. And you also want to think about accessibility for your students. So I had mentioned we actually ended up putting down some like weed tarp and rocks around our garden beds. And that has made it a little difficult for some of our students to access. So we're actually rethinking about how that is set up. We do have a few garden beds that are more accessible, but you want to make sure that, if you have students in wheelchairs or students on crutches or anybody, with any type of like mobility issue, that they are able to access your space and your gardens, so they can participate in your garden, activities and fun. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So you want to think about if you want to build raised beds, if you want to plant in the ground. Benefits of raised beds are that you don't have to worry so much about the soil underneath. Challenges can be you do have to build the beds. Depending on the type of wood you use, you may need to be repairing them every few years. And I just lost my train of thought on that. There's some certain amount of maintenance that comes with raised beds, and like filling them yearly with fresh compost and loam. Benefits of going right into the ground, or you don't have to worry about all that maintenance structure so much. But you definitely need to make sure that you're doing soil testing. There was a concern about like lead at one point in the soil here at our school, and one of the reasons we decided to do raised beds. We did do testing and everything's fine. But you just want to make sure that especially in a school space, that your soil is safe so that the food that you're growing is safe. But growing right in the ground can be a great way to just get, like, you can make a little garden bed right in the ground and get everything going with less cost and less maintenance. So I do like having the raised bed. It's kind of nice too with, you don't have to bend over as much, but it's sort of like whatever works for you. And so I guess I would say that with thinking about all of these sort of tips and ideas we're giving you today, is that really it comes down to what ends up working well for your particular situation, for your school, for your community. Because I don't think there's one size fits all for building a school garden or a school garden program. So you find out like what works for you. Like if a raised bed works for you, you have the resources, you have the materials, you have a plan to keep it maintained, that's great. But if it's also just a better situation for you to go right into the ground and get that soil testing done, then that's what you work with. So think about what would be the best option for your situation.
Yeah. And if I may add, Kelly, sorry.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah. So I've been doing garden work in, I guess, two places in New England that are previously industrial, and in both of those places, and they're also cities, post-industrial cities. I would say if you are in an urban area, there probably is a likelihood that there is lead in the soil. Of course, I can't speak for other areas of Massachusetts, but you test the soil to make sure, but like if there's probably going to be lead, and you don't want that in the food.
Yeah, I think there was a link on that last slide to the University of Massachusetts Extension, and they have, if you go to that site, there's directions for how to collect soil samples. You collect them, you send them right into them. I think it's like a $15 fee for them to test for like each sample that you send in. And then they send you a whole like results list with a readout of like your soil nutrients, and if there's anything hazardous like the lead in your soil, it will show up on that report for you. And then you can think about some mitigation strategies, or definitely, if in that situation, I would definitely recommend some raised beds, or maybe test another location and see if that one's a little bit better. So this is not, these are not like necessary things when thinking about like your garden location. But if you there's a certain amount of tools and materials that you may be needing when you're out in the garden with students. So it is helpful to have a place to store garden tools. Having a seating area for the students, washing station, for hand washing, and then for like post-harvest washing. And then on a hot day, it's really helpful to have a little bit of a shaded area. And even if that's like a little pop-up canopy, like you don't necessarily have to have a permanent structure near your garden space, but it is helpful to have some sort of shade, especially during the summer months when you're working out there, or on a rainy day if you want to go out and do some things with the students in the garden area. It's just nice to have a little bit of a cover. So these I would say are like post, like figuring out like whether you're doing raised beds or in the ground planting, like figure that out first. But you may want to consider some of these other things like as you're thinking about your location and what else you might need space for near your garden area.
Cool. All right, so now we're getting to planting in seed. So a lot of things I hear from people who are interested in school gardens are like, I want to have a school garden, but I have no green thumb. I want to have a school garden, but I kill all of my house plants. And I want to say that is okay. You could still do a school garden. A lot of the stuff that Kelly mentioned before, like placing in terms of like sun and shade, and having good soil, that's really like most of what needs to be there when it comes to outdoor plants. And one thing that always helps me, because even though I've been working in school garden work for like almost a decade, I have unfortunately killed some plants. But one thing that helps me remember is like seeds want to grow. Seeds want to be put in the soil and they want to grow, right? And they will try to grow against like all odds. And there might be a few seeds where you might have to do something special. So if you're interested in growing like milkweed, I think you have to like put it outside for a little bit when it's cold. But for the most part, if you put a seed in the ground, it's going to try its best to grow. That being said, obviously we are in Massachusetts and we have a limited growing season. It's not completely limited. Usually in normal years, there was kind of the saying for New England that you could start planting peas after, St. Patrick's Day. So like early spring, you could plant stuff like peas, oats, even like radishes. And then once you get to the summer, that's where you get some of the more exciting stuff. That's a season for like strawberries and blueberries and tomatoes and peppers and stuff. Sometimes you might want to ask kids what they want to plant in the garden. I always feel so bad when I shut someone down saying like, sorry, we can't really grow mangoes in Massachusetts, but there's lots of other things that could be grown. A lot of other things that could be grown, especially during the summer. But one note, so a lot of things that we do associate with summer, like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and even other summer crops like watermelons, any sort of melon, they often fare better as seedlings, which are just baby plants instead of being directly planted as seeds. And someone pointed out you could do winter sowing as a winter project. That is true. There's cover crop, which is pretty cool. But anyway, so a lot of stuff like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, melons, they often do better as seedlings as opposed to just putting a seed in the ground. That is because there is for tomatoes, it's going to need way more heat to like grow the seedlings, like something like a greenhouse, which, not everyone has. Many communities do have farmers markets and nurseries that sell seedlings. You can ask organizations for donations, such as the trustees in Boston. Sometimes they have donations, but they are trying to make some money as well. So if you have a little bit of a budget to get, you could maybe work something out, maybe get a discount, but don't tell them that I sent you over there. You could also get seedlings at like Home Depot, even though I prefer kind of more local areas. But definitely for stuff like that, get seedlings, and then you're able to put those seedlings in the ground. But when it comes to other things like arugula, leaf lettuce, radishes, carrots, you could just put those seeds in the ground. And seeds are in seed packages, which have all the information you need to learn how to plant. Right? So any specific sort of things, you just look on the back of the seed packet. So we have an example here. This is a particular type of seed. So this is arugula, and I believe it is, I forgot the type. They always have, botanical interest. They have such lovely packets. It's very beautiful. But they have a little bit of like background information about arugula. And then they also have like when you sow it outside, how far you should like space it out. They have USDA zones, which is like, that's what you could look up. Those are just zones in the US that have like different things. So obviously we're going to be a different zone than like Miami, Florida. And they have amount of days it will take for it to pop out of the ground. So 15 days, if after 20 days you don't see any arugula, something might have happened. The depth is very, very small spacing. So that's how far apart the seed should be. And then they also have row spacing. So there's a lot of different, like each plant has a different way that you should spread out the seeds. So arugula, that's going to be way smaller. The seeds won't need to be spaced out as much as like broccoli, right? But the information will always be on the packet. And also when it comes to getting seeds, what I've done in the past, which has been very successful, is literally like call some seed companies and say like, hey, I work at a school garden. I was wondering if you had any extra seeds. You'll see at the very bottom of this packet that it has packed for 2017. So they do sell seed packets to be sold by a certain time. if you call a seed company now, you might get seeds for, well, yeah, you'd get seeds that are like for 2021. But those seeds are still mostly viable. They're probably like 90% viable. So you could plant them like anything else. And then there's also seed libraries in Massachusetts where you could get some seed for free, but definitely experiment. There's lots of different, I mean, there's also like an experimental seed station run out of like New Jersey. There's lots of different seeds and they all have different ways of growing. And it's really cool to see.
I just want to add on the end of that, if you are thinking about, you want to think about with your seed starting, whether like your harvest time as well. So if you have kids in like the spring and the fall, but nobody really in the summertime, you might want to think about which plants will do better in the spring and fall, and maybe leave some of the summer crops for another time until you get your summer care figured out. So definitely like lettuce, kale, Swiss chard, peas, radishes, carrots are all like really great spring vegetables. And then in the fall, you could have, if you plant at the end of the school year, you can have some stuff ready for when the kids come back in the fall, like pumpkins and squashes. I always like to do popcorn with the kids. It's a really fun one. But you might want to think about looking at like your days to harvest and like whether you'll be harvesting in spring or summer or fall, and how that will work for your situation. So I'm going to share a little bit too about building up a network within your school and community to support your school garden. So when we think about farm to school, we kind of talk about the 3 C's, which is classroom, cafeteria, and community. So when I think of classroom, I'm thinking like our curriculum, like your in-school team, making sure that you have some folks like supporting you in the school garden. It's really hard to build a school garden by yourself. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work. So I definitely encourage you to have at least a partner in your endeavor, maybe 2 or 3 or 4. If you can get a team, like somebody from each grade level or anybody who's interested in helping support your school garden, it makes things a lot easier so that you're not finding yourself doing everything by yourself, because it can get to feel a little bit overwhelming, speaking from experience. You definitely want to make sure you have your administration included on what you're doing. Keep them in the loop on, if there are any needs that you have. Sometimes every once in a while, there's like a little bit of extra money in the school budget that they might be able to help you with, maybe purchasing your seeds or something. And definitely being able to tie your garden into your curriculum helps to support, right, that need for supplies. And there's so many amazing curriculum connections, but that's, I think, for another day. You definitely need to have your building and grounds or your custodial staff on board. They are like key to making your garden endeavor successful. I can't tell you how much like I'm so grateful for our custodial staff here at our school. They are amazing. If there's any trouble with like, our water with our hose out there, they'll come out and check it out. With just coordinating, like when we get compost deliveries, like making sure that we'll be able to get it into the building okay, just for that, my particular situation. But they're really a really great people to have on your team. And if you need help with like setting up any structures or like anything like that, make sure you get to know your custodial staff, buy them a coffee here and there. They will appreciate that, and you will appreciate their support as well. You definitely you can talk to your cafeteria staff. Having your cafeteria staff on board with your school garden is great. We oftentimes provide fresh lettuces to our cafeteria, and they put them right in the salads. Depending on your school and your district, there may or may not be some more sort of red tape around doing that. But I think in like the food safety practices webinar coming up, that will be addressed a little bit more. But definitely, keep them in the loop, because they might be really excited to get some like fresh kale from the school garden, or they might be excited to come talk to the kids about some of the stuff they're cooking in the kitchen. There's some really great connections to be made between the cafeteria and the school garden. So I would definitely encourage you to have at least a conversation with your food nutrition people. And then your community, like your PTO, as I mentioned before, is like, it can be a huge support for your school garden. If you have any community gardening organizations, like any garden clubs in the community, sometimes like I reached out to our council on aging at one point to help with like summer care or just coming in to, you know, to work with the kids in the garden, finding other community support. Like if, you know, just sending out an email to parents and saying like, is anybody interested in, you know, coming to help out in the garden here or there? It can be really helpful, and you might end up finding out some contacts that end up being some really good partners for you. So I, you know, PTO I would say is like a must go to. If you have a garden club or anything like that happening in your area, any type of urban agricultural projects that are happening around you, I would definitely reach out and say, hey, we're building this garden, and, you know, do you have any ideas or any support for us? Don't try to do it alone. Like, reach out to people and get support, because it can be, like I said, a big undertaking to build up a whole school garden independently. Did you want to start this one, Kendra? Do you want me to go?
Yeah, I could definitely
Okay.
do that. Yeah, so summer garden care is a big thing in Massachusetts. Our most prominent growing season is the season where there are no students in school. So a good question is, who will take care of the garden in summer when school is not in session? So one way to really get people on board and have a lot of interest is coordinating volunteers. Of course, this is something that takes some work, but you could start a sign-up sheet, you know, when you start talking about the garden. You can even try to like connect with the PTO for some volunteers, and community garden clubs is the same, reaching out to them, seeing if they would like to do some maintenance in the garden. It is, I mean, definitely there's maintenance to be done, but in general, school gardens are not, you're not going to be producing at the same level as a farm, right? So it's not going to be very intensive maintenance, mostly just making sure it's watered once a day and harvesting whatever is there. There's also outside organizations. So in my experience, as someone who worked at outside organizations, I would take some of the take on some of the responsibility for summer maintenance. If there, I don't know if people are in a place where there's like food corps service members, sometimes they're able to do some stuff in like the first month of summer, but outside organizations can help. And then of course, if there is a summer school program, there's definitely something that you can, that's definitely something you could utilize, and making garden maintenance the educational opportunity is good as well. Of course, I feel like most people don't really think of just like harvesting melons or something as like a potential educational opportunity, but there's a lot that could work in there. You could like think about math in terms of like weighing how much you have. It could turn into like even just practicing motor skills with like the harvesting. There's a lot that could really be done. So there's definitely things that you can do to make sure that it's maintained over the summer. And one thing that Kelly mentioned before that I feel like is very important is you definitely want to connect with the custodial staff. Sometimes other people in the school may not connect with them about important things, like please don't cut these pumpkin vines so that the kids could see a pumpkin in the fall. But if you tell them directly, then they'll know. So connecting with custodial staff over the summer is just as important. I think we have another note in the chat about cooperative extension for master gardeners to maintain community gardens. That's also another, outside organization and volunteer service that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that it is helpful to have somebody, like if you're the person who's in charge of your school garden, it is helpful to have like a central person coordinating the volunteers so that it's not just sort of like a free for all. And it is also helpful to have some like basic guidelines posted, or like basic expectations about like watering or weeding. Like these are like the steps, just if you have people coming in without a whole lot of garden experience, so they make sure that, you know, that we don't want to just give like one little tiny drink of water. Like you might need to like really soak the plants if it's, you know, before you take off. So just having some like basic procedures around like your expectations for like what people are doing when they're coming to volunteer can be really helpful. And it doesn't have to be anything like hugely like a huge document, but like a little like short checklist or something can be really helpful. Yeah, and this is something that I have struggled with in my own garden, is like this summer care. So I have switched to doing a lot more like spring harvest, fall harvest vegetables, so that there is minimal attention needed in the summertime. I'm hoping at some point we get to a point where we have more kids out there in the summertime, but we're just not there yet. And just, you know, I think you find a system that works for you again. And you might start small, and you might, you know, you're going to build upon things as you go, and you see what works well one year. And if it didn't go well, you say, okay, we'll make these adjustments, and this is how we're going to structure our volunteers for next year. Or maybe we really want to look into like seeing if one of these outside organizations can partner with us to help with some of this stuff. And I think if you do like a Google search for sort of like school garden organizations, you'll get a whole bunch. And there are quite a few. I'm thinking of like 3 off the top of my head, like around Massachusetts, that are willing to work with schools. Some of them do require like a small fee. So that would be something when thinking about like your funding, like would you have money to pay an organization, or are you really looking for more like volunteer support with your maintenance for the summertime? Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kelly and Kendra, for that start. These are just some additional resources that might help get you started. And I just want to say, following what Kendra shared about curriculum and math, we have a Mass Farm to School has a Harvest of the Month program for educators now, where we are sending monthly emails to educators around certain crops, and they all have lesson plans and book lists and all sorts of things to support the classroom. And right now it's for elementary school, but we're going to be rolling out a secondary school Harvest of the Month program in the fall. So if you're curious about that, please just get in touch with me and you can sign up, and it's a really interesting program. So I think that we'll have some time for questions right now. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up. I haven't gotten to see the chat. So that was a lot of information that Kelly and Kendra shared, and thank you too for getting people started. And if you have any questions, please, now would be a great time to ask.
I think someone's asking about planting pollinator gardens, which I think is great. That actually it connects really well with I think 2nd grade curriculum with habitats. And there's a whole lot of like activities that you can like base curriculum around with planting a pollinator garden. And certainly you know, talking about the need for having those beneficial insects like around, I think pollinator gardens are amazing. Do them.
Yeah.
If you look in a lot of seed catalogs, some of them will have like a bee mix or like a butterfly mix, or like they'll have like seed mixes that are sort of like pre-packaged for you, so that you can just kind of get like a couple packets and like use those for your pollinator space.
Yeah, I want to co-sign that as well. One organization you could reach out to, or not reach out to, but even just look online, is actually the Audubon Society. And when it comes to pollinator gardens, like usually the things that will fare best is native plants or native pollinators, so that we could get some local pollinators around, you know. So I know like what's local in this area is milkweed, which I believe Monarch the pupae of monarch butterflies eat, and then they, fly away. And that's a really cool thing to do with students. But there's lots of native plants that are actually very showy and very, very beautiful and will attract insects. I've heard some people say like, oh, I feel like if a plant is native to Massachusetts, it doesn't look that nice. But we do have a lot of nice looking plants that will serve as great pollinators. So
I see a question in the chat. Oh, do you see that? When bringing groups of students out to the garden, what has worked better in your experience, mixed age groups or keeping the groups close in age?
So I've done a little bit of both. Like I did a garden club for a while before we really started to build the garden into our curriculum. And it was like a mixture of like 4th and 5th graders, which worked well together. I have never done I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever done a group of like K to 5 students. But I guess it would depend too on like the focus of your time out in the garden. Like if you're doing something that's more curriculum based, it might be better to keep it like kids close in age. But if you're going out to do just some like explorations in the garden, like looking for plants that look similar, or like doing like an insect hunt, or I don't know, I guess it depends on like the purpose of your time out in the garden space. So I would kind of say like, I don't see anything wrong with doing like a mixed age group of having like kids of lots of different ages together. But you just want to think about the purpose of your time out there, and it might be easier to do, like a real more structured formal curriculum based lesson with students that are like more similar in age. If you have any type of control over the size of your group, I found that like 20-ish is like, I mean, our class sizes are about like 25 kids, and like that gets to be, it's a lot. 25 kids out in the garden can be a lot to manage. And what I found is helpful when having like a full class like that out there, is to set up like sort of like stations and assign different groups different jobs out in the garden. So I might have like a few groups working on doing some like weeding, while I work with a couple of other groups on doing some harvesting or planting or some more like teacher-led activities. So thinking about like what are things that the kids can do independently in the garden, like maybe like a scavenger hunt, and then what are things that maybe would be more like a guided learning experience out in the garden too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Kelly was going to say just about everything I was going to say. I think it really depends on your goals in the garden. I think there are a lot of like great opportunities for mixed age groups. And most of my experience with bringing mixed age groups in the garden has been in more of a garden club or after school activity where, it's definitely still educational, but there isn't like an explicit curriculum that we're sticking to. Whereas during the day, it's going to be same age because it's usually the same grade, and there's explicit part of the curriculum. So definitely, yeah, try. I think trying both out and just keeping in mind, dynamics of students during both is going to be important. And yeah, you definitely like classroom management in a garden is definitely, I think it can feel intimidating because you're like, oh, the kids are outside, they might like run away, and like they usually don't, but could also get you want to make sure like each student has a room to be engaged in the garden. And yeah, that's what I will say on that.
Yeah, when I was doing a garden club, I think the most amount of students I had out there was like 15, and that was like a great number to work with out in the garden. And now that it's more like the role has changed, it's a lot more students, and I've had to get a little bit more creative about how I'm managing like, yeah, all those dynamics. So but it's still really fun.
Trevor has commented that they've added perennial herb gardens to reduce maintenance, such as parsley, mint, and oregano, as well as perennial foods like strawberries and asparagus.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And also herb gardens are just great because it's a great like sensory thing for students. It could be grounding for some students. And it's also cool to just be able to be like, hey, this smells like lemon, and kids get really excited about that. But yeah, herb gardens are great, and herbs do really well in Massachusetts. So you could even make tea with students depending on what, like with mint. One thing I will say is mint could become kind of invasive in garden beds. So I would put it in a pot on the side. Like I wouldn't just, or if you have it in a garden bed, be prepared for the entire garden bed to be mint in a few years.
Yeah, that happened with I think catnip in my garden. Now there's like a whole, it was like one little piece of one little bed, and now it's like a whole garden bed of like catnip. So yeah, some of those are sort of like climbing ones. And actually I was made the mistake with raspberries too. And so now I started with one like bed with raspberries, and I don't know why I thought I should have planted it in the garden bed, but I did. And now it's like 4 beds of raspberries. So if you have something that has a tendency to sort of like sprawl, you might want to, yeah, either put it in a container or put it like at the edge of your garden space, which is what I'm wishing I did with the raspberries. But it is really nice to have those perennial plants in the garden, because there's something you can always count on coming up, and you're not worrying about like starting the seeds inside, and they're there for like the kids to explore, right? Like right in the spring or early summer or whatever. So.
And Kelly, I think that is testament to like someone as experienced as you could, fumble like that and then just have to deal. And so it's just about, taking a risk. And like sometimes we choose wrong.
Yep, you learn as you go.
There is a question back in the chat that just came to me, and I don't have an answer, and I don't know if you two do, but the question was, are there grants that are geared specifically for funding paid garden program staff and services for garden educators, specialists, coordination, et cetera, beyond what a district might provide? Have you two come across anything like that?
That is a really tough one. And that's one actually I've been working on, even in our district. We're trying to figure out funding for like a coordinator position. And it's really hard to find grant funding that supports salaries, is what I've been finding. USDA farm to school grants could be a possibility, but I don't think it would be something that would fund like an entire position. But if you haven't looked into those USDA farm to school grants, they are really great. There's like a planning grant and an implementation grant. They are pretty extensive and competitive. So you really have to have like a good grant writing team and like a solid plan to get one of those. But yeah, in my experience, finding grant funding to pay a position or pay a salary is really, really difficult. So I am still on the hunt. If I find anything, I will certainly share with Dinah so she can like send it out to all of you. But a lot of the grant funding that's out there for school gardens is for like materials and supplies and things like that, which is great. But yeah, having that funding for like a position or a person to help with like managing and running the school gardens is really awesome or important too. I was gonna say, I think Food Corps does a lot of work sometimes with school gardens. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
They might be someone to reach out to, for just some support, because I think they will come and do some work that you don't have to necessarily pay for.
Yeah, I would check to see if your district has Food Corps, or if you could get Food Corps into that district. I think the process is like a little more complicated, or getting more complicated, and Food Corps has certain parameters, like they want people working in a district that I think has like at least 50% reduced or free school lunch, et cetera, but check it. Yeah, so then we also have the USDA FTS grant. Yes, thank you, Lisa, for posting that. I was about to say, I think there are a few of the bigger grants have like some stipulations, like, oh, like 20% of the grant money could be used towards funding, which isn't usually about 20% of a salary. But definitely keep looking for the grants, and if we see any, we'll let you know. Someone said Food Corps is limited in scope as far as towns that they're able to work in. Yeah, like I said, there are there are some like towns food court prefers to work in, but I know they are in Lowell, they're in Chelsea. I supervise 2 food court service members, and they were in Boston. They're in, I think, Springfield. They're around, they're out there. So
So does anyone are there other questions that people are curious about? I just put the slide deck link in the chat, and this is the first of a series. The next workshop is going to be on March 8th, and that is going to be about garden food safety. Mass Farm to School has been working with MDAR to create a program for schools to self-assess. It's a tool to self-assess garden food safety. There's checklists and there's a lot of resources around a program that you could implement yourself. And there's also a connection to MDAR, the CQP program, if you wanted to get certified for your school in school garden food safety. So that's going to be on the 8th. And then I think on March 31st, we have another workshop called Best Practices in the School Garden, where we're going to be just going to like the next level of what we talked about today. So anything that people are curious about while we have this expertise here? Do you two want to share like a success or something, like a favorite moment to round us out, to end the workshop? Do you want to share, like, not to put you on the spot, but like just a great moment you had in your school garden?
I can share one. It's still one of my favorite. We have quite a diverse population in our school, and a lot of English language learners. And I was out there one day with some of the kindergartners, and we were out there digging around in the garden, and one of them come up and he was like, "Miss Cronin, it's my first worm." And he was so excited about it. And it was the cutest thing. So just like, there's like little tiny like joy of discovery moments of like, why would I would never think that would be like my moment, but it was the best moment. He was like, "It's my first worm."
Oh, he'll never forget.
That was really exciting.
He'll
And I
never
would say,
forget his first worm.
Yeah, feel free. My email, I think, is somewhere on that slide deck, and I'm happy if you're like starting to work through the process of starting your garden and like have anything that comes to mind in terms of a question. I'm happy to try to answer or help. I'm not saying I definitely can, but feel free to reach out if you have anything else that comes to mind, like afterwards.
Yeah, I'm also very happy you could reach out to me as well. I'm happy to help where I can. And my favorite garden memory, so in Chelsea, there's a garden for like youth internships called Anita's Garden. And this year I just suggested off the top of my head, or last year I suggested off the top of my head, like, let's plant cucamelons, which is, it's in the cucurbit, it's in the melon family, but it's different from cucumbers, it's different from melons. They're like tangy little, little cucumbers. So we planted them, and we had so many cucamelons, like we had an absurd amount. But some of the students liked them. Some of the students did not like them, but they all did try them, which is also, that's a success when it comes to high school students. If they try something new, even if they're like, not my favorite, that's fine. But we did have a lot of students that are like, oh, my like younger brother would love this. Let me take this home. So it was really great to see students like eating fresh food from the garden and then also bringing it at home to their siblings or family members. That was really cool. So.
Great. Well, Kelly and Kendra, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise today. And as Kelly and Kendra said, I put our email addresses in the chat, and they're also on the slide deck. So feel free, if you need any support or you have any questions, to just get in touch with any of us. And if you're interested in any of Mass Farm to School workshops or signing up for Harvest of the Month program, just reach out to us.
All
right.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.